Thank you everyone so much for coming this afternoon. Sorry for the delay. Thank you for your patience. And thank you to Alastair Campbell. And I apologise to you and Alastair for the rain. In the unlikely and unfortunate event of a fire, we have fire exits here, here and here. In terms of the format for this afternoon, the first part will be a talk. The second part will be an audience Q&A where you have the chance to grill Alastair. And the third part will be a book signing. We will be on Twitter, we are trending, #CampbellYork. Make sure you include the @York Union for a chance of a retweet. Alastair Campbell needs no introduction, yet as the host I am still obliged to give one. But it will be very brief. Alastair Campbell is former journalist at the Mirror, former spokesperson for Tony Blair's government, and is accredited with revolutionising the relationship between government and the media. His roles now are many and varied and are difficult to describe in one phrase. Suffice to say, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you author, fundraiser, political strategist, broadcaster, marathon runner connoisseur, actor, embattled Burnley Football Club supporter, and the scourge of Paul Dacre and the Daily Mail, Alastair Campbell.
Well, first of all, to deal with, I believe in rebuttal, okay? We're not embattled, we are third in the championship. I think the Queen's Park Rangers tomorrow will be second in the championship. That is not embattled, you don't do it. You went to the wrong sort of school. We'll get on to private education. Now, on the way over, I was asked whether I do a lot of talks, and the truth is, I do a lot of talks. So there's a seat there. I do a lot of talks, and the thing is, I've heard everything I've said before quite a lot. So I tend to just turn up and just decide as I go what I'm going to talk about. Now I've sort of got vague ideas. I'm in Yorkshire. That gives me something to talk about because I was born in Yorkshire. In Keighley. Lots of people think I was born in Keighley. I was born in Yorkshire. So that's one thing. I'm in university, so we can doubtless at some point we'll talk about education. But the other thing, the introduction tells me a few things to talk about. And one of the reasons that I do talk in colleges and universities, even though you're always a little bit at risk in universities, one of the things reason I do it is because I think there's a real problem in what you described as, you said I'd revolutionise the relationship between media and politics. Well, I'm not sure I did, but I do think that it's changed, and it's changed in a way that I think is really quite damaging and potentially actually quite dangerous, because we are in a democracy. We may not like some of our leaders, we may not like them some of the time, we may not like them all of the time, but we are in a democracy. And the fact is that the media debate and how the media conducts itself is an incredibly important part of that democracy. I don't actually like being in the position where I'm sort of portrayed as being this kind of, hammer of the press, because I started out as a journalist, and one of the reasons I went into journalism is because I really liked the idea of being a journalist. I've just done a couple of interviews, which is, I presume, the reason for the delay. I didn't realise it was delayed. Apologies for that. But I was doing a couple of interviews with student journalists, and they always say, any advice, and the advice I always give to young journalists is just to love doing it, because it's one of the most amazing privileged existences that anybody can have. And it's hard at the moment because it's quite hard to get a job. It's quite hard to get well paid for that job in newspapers. But the whole kind of the way the media landscape, social media and stuff is revolutionising itself, it's possible that there's a kind of new landscape emerging. There'll be lots of opportunities in the future that aren't there now. But the great thing about being a journalist is you can literally just go up to anybody in the world and ask them a question. When I was a young journalist, I just couldn't believe that. The fact you could go up to complete strangers and say, I'm doing a piece about men who wear blue anoraks when they're sitting in auditoriums. And, they talk to you. They used to do this one a lot. You go up to women and you say, I'm doing a feature about handbags and what women keep in their handbags. And you know what? 9 out of 10 women would open their handbags for you. It's kind of crazy and odd, but they do it. And so, being a journalist is a wonderful thing, not because you can look in handbags, but actually because you can write, which is good. You can be part of the creative process, which is good. You can be, and you can be part of the world of change, which is, I think, was good. Now, along the way, I mean, just to sort of very briefly take you through my life, born in 1957 in Keighley, Yorkshire, father a vet. I think he's very disappointed. 4 kids, none of us went into the science. We all kind of went what he would see probably as the wrong route. So I was hopeless at science, good at languages. I went down the languages route. Lived in Yorkshire since I was 11. Father had a terrible accident. We had to moved to Leicester, went to school there, same school as Gary Lineker and Emil Heskey. So I'm very, very good at football, that means. Went to Cambridge University, hated it. Did languages, had a year abroad, loved it in France, and then came back, did my finals, somehow got a 2-1, don't quite know how that happened, but did, and then didn't have a clue what to do. Did all sorts of different things. I was a roulette dealer. I do know how to win at roulette, but it's really, really boring and you don't want to know. I worked in factories, I did all sorts of stuff. I busked around the world with my bagpipes, and then eventually I just decided to become a journalist. And to this day, I mean, I used to drink a lot, I'll come on to that. But I used to drink a lot, and to this day I can't remember how I knew that there was such a thing as the Mirror Group training scheme. But I applied to it, I got on it, became a journalist. I then went through sort of various kind of, general news, showbiz, eventually got into politics, and that's where I realised that, politics ultimately was, I think, where I wanted to be. But then, life is what happens to you when you're busy planning things. I had a nervous breakdown in the 80s. I know one of the things I do now, I can't remember if this was in your list, but I do a lot of campaigning for mental health charities and for alcohol concern on mental illness and alcoholism in particular, because I had a really, really quite bad breakdown. I never kind of understood why people called it cracking up until I cracked up. Then I knew why they called it cracking up, because you literally crack. My mind was like, the only way I can describe it is like, I had this sense that my mind was made of glass. I was in Scotland, I was feeling very, very weird. I'd been on a really bad long bender. I'd been promoted actually. I'd just gone from the Mirror to Today. I was the youngest news editor on Fleet Street, drinking very, very heavily, and I was out on a road trip with Neil Kinnock, who was then leader of the Labour Party, and I'm suddenly just literally cracking up. And my mind is just this sort of sheet of plate glass, and suddenly it just sort of literally goes pop. And inside my head, when I told Tony Blair about this, it's funny because, funny. When Tony Blair asked me to work for him, I said, there's a few things you need to know about me. He said, well, I know you had a breakdown. I said, yeah, well, I need to tell you. I know you had a drink. Yeah, I need to tell you about it. I know you get depression. I need to tell you about that. And I told him all these things. It's what I call the conversation that David Cameron never really had with Andy Coulson. all the things I've done that could become a bit of a problem. So anyway, I told him this thing, and when I got to the glass cracking, and he says, well, what happens? I said, well, it's not really glass, but the reason I got arrested, I got picked up for my own safety, because I was standing in a public place going like this, okay? Now when you see people, whenever you see people go like that, which you might see from time to time, if they're anything like me, it's because they can't work out why they're not bleeding, because inside their head they've got all this glass exploding. As the glass is exploding, you're all looking at me a bit worried now. Some of you think I didn't know this. As the glass is exploding, I'm hearing noises as well. You know when you hear people saying they hear voices? I was hearing voices. And I was hearing music, I was hearing bagpipes, I had a brass band, I had a football crowd, I had an argument going on in the office, I had an argument about at home, because there's been quite a few of those in the run-up to this event. And that's all going on in my head, and I'm going like this because I can't feel the blood. And then I'm thinking I'm being tested for my survival. That's what this is about. This is a test, and I'm being tested. I was in Scotland. Why am I being tested? And I thought it was because I was being challenged politically. Now this is mad, okay? This is psychotic. But that's what was happening. And I thought, right, politics, I'm being challenged politically. Somebody comes by and says, because I'm going like this, they're a bit worried, said, are you all right? That's quite a nice thing to say, nice human being thing to say. And I'm thinking, he's saying, are you right wing? Yes. So I look at the guy and say, talk to me. No, I'm not. Okay, I'm not right wing. And he goes, okay, and leaves you alone. And you know, when I see people now on the streets, living on the streets, I mean, I don't do God, but I do there but for the grace, because I kind of, you know, these two policemen came over, and this guy, this very, very tall, taller than me, this copper, he says to me, he said, are you okay? And I said, do you know what, I don't think I am. And he said, do you want to come with us? I said, you know what, I think I should. Now, let's just imagine that he'd actually said to me, hey, what's going on here? And I'm doing that. And let's just imagine I'd hit him, which is not impossible, because I've hit people in the past. And, you know, I often think about that guy. Where would I have ended if he had not actually been? All right, that's all right. Turn it off. Put it on silent. The little thing on silent. You can have the 7th question in the Q&A. I know you wanted it first. So, anyway, why have I suddenly gone down that track? I'll tell you why. Because I think at the moment, I've got 3 kids, 25, 23, 19. I know a lot of young people. I do go to quite a lot of universities. And I think this whole mental health agenda is just not where it should be in terms of the political policy debate. Parliament, oh sorry, the thing I was going to tell you about Tony Blair, when he said, I was telling him all this, and he did look, 14th question, he did look sort of slightly alarmed, but eventually he said, well look, I'm not bothered about any of that. I said, well, what if I'm bothered? And he said, I'm still not bothered. Now I thought that was a really, really important insight about him for me, because a lot of people would have been bothered. And the reason why, for example, only 4 MPs have admitted to having had mental health problems is because there's still so much stigma and discrimination associated with it. And I was doing a talk recently, and a nurse stood up, an NHS nurse, very nice, but she said, listen, it's all very well for you, it's all very well for Stephen Fry, it's all very well for Ruby Wax, you're well known, you get money thrown at you to do stuff and all the rest of it, you don't have to worry where your next job coming from. I'm a nurse in the National Health Service. If I were to put on my application form for promotion that I'm on antidepressants via my GP, which I am, I know, she said, I hope she's wrong, she said, I know that would be held against me. Now, and that is possibly true. And part of the reason why I talk about all this stuff is because until we get to a situation, I bet, how many of you know that the National Health Service Constitution, the words are there that mental health must be given the same priority and services as physical health? Well, it doesn't happen. And until we make it happen, I don't think that as a country we're truly civilised and making the most of the potential that we've got. And I think it's the next generation who I think get this more instinctively. Partly because I think people are more open, becoming more open, but also because I think there just is so much more pressure on young people than there was. I don't know why it's happening, but I talk to a lot of psychiatrists, only one for my own benefit, the rest is part of all this campaigning stuff. And it is extraordinary the extent to which they say they're just seeing more and more young people with real, serious psychological problems. And, I think we just need to sort of get wise to that. Okay, I've done that bit. That's journalism. Now, when that happened to me, I had told you about Tony Blair sort of saying, I'm not bothered if you're not bothered. I had another amazing piece of luck. My former boss at the Mirror phoned me up and he said, quote, I hear you've gone mad. I said, well, I'm not very well. That's good. And he said, well, I did tell you not to go to that place, didn't I? I said, yeah, I know, it's not very helpful to you now. Thanks anyway. Next thing he said was amazing. He said, look, can I give you a bit of advice? Yeah, go on. He said, take the money while you're there on the sick. When you're better, you can come back here. And that was the most extraordinary thing for me, because it basically was him, again, making a rounded judgment. He made me start at the bottom again, which actually wasn't a bad thing. I think one of my sort of rules in life is every setback is an opportunity, but you've really got to kind of embrace that. And if you look at, I think you look at any successful people, whether, and I look at a lot of people in sport in particular, it's not a single, there's an Irish guy who trains all those Kenyan athletes, you know, top of the world in marathon, 10,000 metres and so forth. And he's got this wonderful quote. He says, a winner is a loser who has evaluated defeat. And I think that's just a brilliant way to look at going through life. Things go wrong. What do you learn from that? How do you sort of try and rebuild from that? How do you move on? And I eventually, you know, if you'd have said to me when I was a child, or when I was, you know, even when I was leaving university, when I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. So there I am, 22 years of age. If you'd have said to me, do you know what? Within 20 years or so, you'll be working in Downing Street. You'll be bumping into Nelson Mandela. You'll be having a laugh with Bill Clinton about, you know, stuff. You'll be writing speeches for Prime Minister. You'll be, you know. I said, well, that's just, there's no way in the world that is going to happen. Why is that going to happen? But it did happen. And I think that, again, I say this to my own kids, and, you know, they've got to sort of find their own way. But I do think people should think that they can achieve anything that they want to achieve. And then, if you like, the role of educational institutions, the role of governments, the role of institutions more generally, is to try to sort of create the circumstances that give people the best chance of making that happen. Because I think that, you know, one of the reasons I do get very, very exercised about private education, for example, I do honestly think that Britain will never, ever, ever genuinely be a truly meritocratic country while we've got this 7% at the top who are then into 70% of top jobs, whether it's politics, whether it's media, whether it's whatever it might be, and that has gone on yea unto the Middle Ages. And I think that is one of the things that's held us back rather than has taken us forward. But I do think that there are people, and one of the things, if you like, I think is good, if you like, about the top private schools is that they do sort of seem to give people this incredible confidence that they can go on and achieve. Now, I think we've got to give that to all kids, because if we don't, because that's what's happening in the countries that are going to take us overtake Britain. You know, what's happening in the, what, I mean, they're called the developing economies, but I don't think anybody's been to China recently, but, you know, it doesn't feel like a developing economy to me. It feels like the one that's pretty soon going to be the global power. And one of the reasons for that, I think, I sometimes think in education that we look at things through the wrong end of the telescope. In that we say, right, we have all this history, we've got all this success, we've got all this stuff that's happened in the history of Britain, and here's things that kids have to learn. You've got to do maths, you've got to do English, you've got to get a language, although I think one of the mistakes we made was to drop that. But you've got to do all these things. Science is developing, technology, they've got to learn about all that. I don't think what we don't do sufficiently well, for my taste, is actually to say, here's a child, what are they good at? Where are they going to have an aptitude that then we can really develop? And do we have the facilities then, and do we have the expertise around them to be able to say, right, we've discovered that so-and-so is very, very good at a particular thing, and let them develop in that. And again, you know, sorry to keep banging on about sport, but I think it's so important. And I also think it's where you can learn so much about this. That's the one place where people say, yeah, that's how you should do it. But actually, why shouldn't we be doing that for kids who have got an aptitude for science, have got an aptitude for writing, have got an aptitude for languages, whatever it might be, that actually you look at their talent, and then the job of the teacher is to develop that talent, rather than get them through the same exams that everybody else is going to do, and by the time you get to university, you've forgotten 70% within a term anyway. So I think that, you know, it's just a different way of looking at things. Now, the other thing I would say, so I go through my journalism, and I'm sad that I've ended up with such a critic of journalism, because I still love journalism in lots of different ways. But I do think if you're really, really going to make change, then, and you care about political issues, then I think at some level, you do have to kind of go into the political arena in some form. Now that can take, you know, protest is a part of the political process. People who are governors of schools are part of that whole kind of public service ethos. And so I'm not just talking about party politics here, but to go into the political arena I think is where real change ultimately comes from. I used to kid myself and persuade myself when I was a journalist that I was, I was working with the Daily Mail, I was writing these wonderful kind of, rabid editorials about Margaret Thatcher and all her works, and I thought, yeah, that's going to bloody like a sideways if she reads that. Well, one, she'll never have read it. I'm absolutely sure about that. Thatcher used to be extraordinary on these foreign trips. She knew who everybody was. She knew all these journalists. Journalists would ask, say we were in Prague, and there'd be a journalist there from the BBC or the Times, and she knew absolutely who they were. She said, yes, I'll take the gentleman from one of the Czech papers, and sort of pointed and made it feel this big. But the fact is that if you're in politics, you really, really can make a difference. And I think one of the things, I'm right back to what I said at the start about why I worry about the way this debate has developed between media and politics, is that the relentless negativity about politics. Now, you can blame the politicians if you want. You can say, well, if they're going to fill their expenses, they deserve everything they get. But just to take that one example, how many people here can name MPs who didn't fill their expenses? How many people can name MPs who actually never claimed anything? They exist, but you never hear about them. Now, I'm not saying that if somebody feels that commits a criminal offence and they shouldn't be punished the same as anybody else, and some have gone to jail. But let's not sort of live with this idea that everybody goes into politics is a bad thing, because there's only one thing that results from that, is that nobody goes into politics, because they think, well, only bad people go into politics, and why on earth would I want to do that? I'm a good person. Politics then can't be represented either. So I think people can complain about the quality of political leadership, they can complain about their MP, but actually it's like when people say, you sort of stuck in a traffic jam and you phone home, you're obviously not driving, you phone home and you say, I'm in the traffic, I'm stuck in traffic. You've got to say to them, you are the traffic. We are the traffic. When we say that our MPs are crap, well, our MPs are our representatives. We put them there. They are part of us. They're part of the process that we own and we belong to. And I think until we think of it in those terms, then this them and us, which is fueled by this kind of relentlessly negativising media, it's not going to change. And look, if I go and lots of people from business came into government. Now, David Sainsbury was a science minister, absolutely brilliant. Others who were really, really successful at running a business, Archie Norman on the Tory side, David Simon, who came in from BP and found he just couldn't stand the scrutiny and everything he'd ever done being trawled over by the papers and all the rest of it. It's a difficult thing to do. You're only going to do it if you really, really believe in the change that you can make. So I always say to anybody who's interested in politics, kind of give it a go. Do try and get involved, because the net effect of this relentless negativity is people aren't going to go into it. And what's more, the trust that you do need, and again, trust a complicated thing. People can say, well, you said you weren't going to do tuition fees, and then it happened. And they'd say the same to Nick Clegg, and you have to say, yeah, that's true, and you can try to explain that. Lots of people will say to me, more than 1 million people marched against the war in Iraq, but the government still went to war in Iraq. What's the point? And I can see why they might say that, but actually you then have to go back and say, well, okay, you didn't win that argument, and you can criticise and you can blame and all the rest of it, but if you look at all the great sweeps of change through history, whether it's racial equality, whether it's women's equality, whether it's the campaign for gay rights, whether it's whatever it might be, it took politics to make the change happen. And if we all just sort of sit around and say, well, politics can't achieve anything, then we're going to hell in a handcart. I mean, there you think, recently, Mandela's died, okay? Now, I met Mandela quite a lot. Funny enough, the first time I ever met him was one of the most extraordinary moments of my life, not for the obvious reason. That was, yes, he just got out of jail. I was a journalist on the Mirror. Do you remember those with grey hair will remember the concert at Wembley, which was sort of, it was a celebration of the anti-apartheid movement, it was obviously the world gets to see Mandela and all the rest of it. I got a phone call from Dick Cable, a Labour MP. There again, Dick Cable, and his name was barely mentioned when Mandela died, big part of the anti-apartheid movement. And he phoned me up and he said, Mandela's come, we're doing this concert, do you think you can get Maxwell to sponsor it? Robert Maxwell, does everybody know who Robert Maxwell was? Robert Maxwell was my kind of boss, probably the first megalomaniac I met. When you ask your 21st question, you can ask me who the second and third and fourth were. And so I went to see Maxwell and said, any chance you could sponsor this concert? We get branding and they said, well, very well, but And then he said, I'll do it and I'll throw in my helicopter, you can use my helicopter for flying around, but I insist that he comes here and we have a lunch or a dinner or something. So fair enough, I go back, that's all done. So Mandela is barely out of jail, okay? The guy is one of the few living legends any of us are ever going to meet, okay? He arrives in the helicopter, on the roof, we go down to Maxwell's dining room, we're all sitting around there. Every single person in the room, apart from Maxwell, the hair on their necks is standing up, because Nelson Mandela walked into the room and he's being Nelson Mandela, which only Nelson Mandela can do. Nobody else can do that today. We start the small talk's over, start the dinner, and Maxwell starts, I promise you, this is verbatim, which is etched in my memory. He says, Nelson, you've been away for a long time. And while that's been going on, the world has changed. And you're now in a position where you're going to be called upon to do something which very few people are ever called upon to do. You're going to negotiate the future of your country. Nelson, I know a thing or two about negotiation. And I want you to know the single most important quality required in a negotiation is patience. So Mandela looks across the table and says, "Oh, I think I know a thing or two." So, anyway, the point is, says Mandela, dead, alas, but when he died, and I just thought of all these people I knew who'd been part of his life and who'd been part of a campaign when he was in jail. I mentioned one, Dick Cable. Bob Hughes, another Labour MP, was the president of anti-apartheid. Very, very good friend of mine, Mr. Sean Slovo, whose dad, Joe Slovo, was one of those senior white member of the ANC, and whose life was ripped apart. You know, the mother dead, mother killed by it, kids having to live here, all that sort of stuff. And then you think about all the people, so those who said, you know, I went on that march and nothing happened. There were lots of marches during the whole apartheid era. People said, we're going on these marches and nothing has happened. But actually change does kind of come. One of the best films I've ever seen about campaigning is a film some of you may have seen called Milk, which is about Harvey Milk, the gay rights campaign. And what's amazing about that film is it starts with Harvey Milk and his gay friends being beaten up as they go out all dressed up as you know, openly gay people in California. It ends with him on the steps of Congress having delivered the first piece of gay rights legislation in America. Now, what's incredible about that is you don't know, from the start to the end of the film, you don't know where the change came. Because it didn't come when the law was passed. The law being passed was a response. It was a product of the change that people were making happen. And ultimately, it's so easy to be cynical about politics, but that is how change happens. People make change happen. Change only comes when people want change to come. You mentioned my good friend, the editor of the Daily Mail, Paul Dacre. Right, that paper's only going to change if people stop buying it. As I go up and say to them every time I see them reading it on a train, as they pick it up as you're getting onto it. If you get on British Airways, by the way, and you see them giving out free, just do what I do. And okay, it goes on their sales figures, it doesn't matter. You only change things if you make change yourselves. You only make change happen if you decide to go and change things. So we all know the stuff that's good about the world and the stuff that's bad about the world. We can't make a difference in everything, but we can make a difference in some things. And so I think the fact that you all come out here on a horrible, wet, windy Thursday afternoon means that you're kind of vaguely interested in politics, I guess, so you're vaguely interested in some of the stuff that I'm meant to know about. So all I say, should I shut up now? Yeah. You would? Did you say you would? Okay, it's going to get fine. It's going to get, when we get into private education, it's going to get So that is the one thing I'd say. When somebody says to you, nothing ever changes, it's bollocks. When somebody says you can't make a difference, that's bollocks as well. And don't let the cynics and the negatives and the negativizers and the naysayers say that you can't make a difference, because you can.